What has been the whole thrust of what we've been doing here through the first 11 steps? Why were we going through the first 11 steps? To bring us to 12. To have a spiritual awakening, all right, which will overcome our problem. And that spiritual awakening is to overcome the can't quit obsession by a personality change. Now, you know, in the evening we're going to have a closing, after the speaker this evening, a closure. And I think there's quite a few people ought to be there, because that subject we covered in inventory, that word that nobody was talking about, has been totally misinterpreted. I think we ought to go back over that. That was that word with sex. All right? Chapter 7, working with others. All right? Practical experience. What is practical experience? Practical experience is experience that's been used, tried, proven. Its practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. How do we know this to be true? An awful lot of people come into AA and they start hearing about spiritual experiences and the personality change necessary to overcome drinking, and they go from the sublime to the ridiculous, and they say, oh, you're one of those guys that are going to have this religious experience and never drink again, huh? That's not what it says. Because Bill Wilson had an experience of the variety that many of us have never had. And I'll read to you again what he says, what happened to him. And you'll find out that because you have the type of spiritual experience he had, it does not keep you sober. My wife and I abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution to their problems. It was fortunate for my old business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, during which I found little work. I was not too well at the time and was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink, but I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. When we go into the other chapter, the family afterward, it's going to tell you that the biggest thing you can do in your early sobriety is to work with others, to retain your sobriety. And you will find out that it never says you must be sober a year to work with an alcoholic. It tells you in the beginning of your recovery, nothing will so ensure immunity, nothing will help the alcoholic more than work with another alcoholic to help you retain your sobriety. So a lot of this misinformation that you have to achieve certain things before you do it is misinformation according to the founders. If Bill Wilson had to wait a year to work with another alcoholic, he probably would have never had a program to follow. We never would have had a program. So let's just follow what the Black Print says. And I would like to reiterate again that what are we really doing here? This is not Bill Finley's idea. I've tried to keep it to the Black Print. Maybe I've regressed someplace and gave you the idea that certain things were my ideas. I might share my experience, but I've tried to keep it as close to the Black Print as possible, so that when you leave here, if you ever need direction, you go back to the Black Print and you will have it. Remember I said, don't read the spaces in between, the white spaces. It works when other activities fail. This is our 12th suggestion. Carry this message to other alcoholics. You can help when no one else can. You can secure their confidence when others fail. Remember, they are very ill. Life will take on new meaning. To watch people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, to see a fellowship grow up about you, to have a host of friends, this is an experience you must not miss. The happiest people I have met in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous are the people who work the most with other people. Do you ever see a person sitting down, I can't get it, help me, I can't get it, help me. They stay sick. Carl Menninger, who run a mental health clinic out in the Kansas area, and a very noted clinic, was asked one time at one of his lectures, Dr. Menninger, if you know a person who's depressed to the point of suicide, what do you recommend they do? He said, lock up the house, go across the tracks, and find somebody in need. In other words, get out of yourself. Everybody says this. We want to go through some kind of psychological adjustment. Helping others is it. We know you will not want to miss this. Frequent contact with newcomers and with each other is the bright spot of our lives. That's meeting other AAs and going to meetings. Perhaps you are not acquainted with any drinkers who want to recover. You can easily find some by asking a few doctors, ministers, priests, or hospitals. It doesn't say you have to wait till your telephone rings and they ask for help. It didn't say that. It said you need somebody to work with, go find them. There's another misnomer in there, all right? They will be only too glad to assist you. Don't start out as an evangelist or reformer. Again, don't start talking about God's spirituality. Talk about yourself. Unfortunately, a lot of prejudice exists. You'll be handicapped if you arouse it. Ministers and doctors are competent and you can learn much from them if you wish, but it happens that because of your own drinking experience, you can be uniquely useful to other alcoholics. With what? With what experience? Your drinking experience. The identification. So cooperate, never criticize. To be helpful is our only aim. When you discover a prospect for Alcoholics Anonymous, find out all you can about him or her. If he does not want to stop drinking, don't waste time trying to persuade him. You may spoil a later opportunity. This advice is given for his family also. They should be patient, realize they are dealing with a sick person. If there is any indication that he wants to stop, have a good talk with the person most interested in him, usually his wife. Get an idea of his behavior, his problems, his background, the seriousness of his condition, and his religious leanings. You need this information to put yourself in his place, to see how you would like him to approach you if the tables were turned. Sometimes it is wise to wait till he goes on a binge. The family may object to this, but unless he is in a dangerous physical condition, it is better to risk it. Don't deal with him when he is very drunk unless he is ugly and the family needs your help. What are you going to get across to a drunk? Wait for the end of the spree, or at least for a lucid interval. Then let his family or a friend ask him if he wants to quit for good, and if he would go to any extreme to do so. If he says yes, then his attention should be drawn to you as a person who has recovered. You should be described to him as one of a fellowship who, as part of their own recovery, try to help others and who will be glad to talk to him if he cares to see you. You're getting a little background of information on the prospect you're going to see. All right? These directions in here may seem complicated, but as we go through them, you'll see they'll simplify themselves. If he does not want to see you, never force yourself upon him. Neither should the family hysterically plead with him to do anything, nor should they tell him much about you. They should wait for the end of his next drinking bout. You might place this book where he can see it in the interval. Here, no specific rule can be given. You play it by ear. All right, the family knows this person probably better than we're ever going to. The family must decide these things, but urge them not to be over anxious, for that might spoil matters. Usually, the family should not try to tell your story. When possible, avoid meeting a man through his family. Now, this sounds contradictory, doesn't it? Approach through a doctor or an institution is a better bet. They're talking to you about one scenario because he's not in a hospital and the family's handling it. Now they're saying if there's an opportunity, approach him through an institution or a doctor. Only you know which is possible. If your man needs hospitalization, he should have it, but not forcibly unless he is violent. Let the doctor, if he will, tell him he has something in the way of a solution. Prime him. That's what happens in detox units. When your man is better, the doctor might suggest a visit from you. Though you have talked with the family, leave them out of the first discussion. Under these conditions, your prospect will see he is under no pressure. He will feel he can deal with you without being nagged by his family. Call on him while he is still jittery. He may be more receptive when depressed. Now, there's an awful lot of people who relapse and drink, and they want to get the attention of the fellows who come to see them. And they usually will do this when they're drinking their cup of coffee. And say, boy, is he shaking. When you want to see a true case of the shakes, you don't only shake in the hands, you'll see the body vibrating. If you ever go on a call and you see a man whose hands are shaking and you see his shirt vibrating, you've got a real man ready to throw a jerry. You better get him into a hospital. The handshake only? No. When you see that body vibrating, every nerve and fiber of his body is vibrating immediately. That's worked for me about 7 times. True cases of a preparatory to a convulsion. And it's been true. And my sponsor pointed that out to me. A lot of guys want to get your sympathy. They drink a cup of coffee, they make their hand shake like as if they're nervous. Watch that body. You see the body tremor? Quickly get them into a hospital. Or get them some booze if you can't get them in a hospital. See your man alone if possible. At first, engage in general conversation. What's general conversation? Sure. Oh, isn't it hot outside? Did you see the Indians last night? Boy, they blew that game. Are you interested in sports? It's just general conversation. After a while, doesn't say after one question, it says after a while. Turn to talk to some phase of drinking. Tell him enough about your drinking habits, symptoms, and experiences to encourage him to speak of himself. Who are you talking about when you go on a 12-step call? Yourself. You're not talking about the alcoholic. Why are you talking about yourself when you go see that alcoholic? No, because when you're talking about yourself, there's nothing he can deny. You'll not get into a squabble with him because you're only talking about you. He can't deny a thing. Once you point the finger at him and say you, then you got trouble. If he wishes to talk, let him do so. When I first started 12-step work, we were told, tell him to keep his mouth shut. He's not to talk. We would tie a guy up in knots. Never give him a chance. Oh, you're not alcoholic, then why is this happening? I was told that if you didn't get a man to a meeting the night you went to see him, he was never going to sober up. I was led to believe that 12-step work was a recruiting process, that you were out there to get people into AA. What are we learning about 12-step work? Who stays sober as a result of it? We do. You're never on an unsuccessful 12-step call. If you go to see 100 people and every one of them get drunk, you're not unsuccessful. What did the doctor say to Bill Wilson? You stayed sober, Bill. That's the whole foundation from the very beginning. No matter what happens to the people we work with, we stay sober as a result of our efforts. You will thus get a better idea of how you ought to proceed. If he is not communicative, give him a sketch of your drinking career up to the time you quit. But say nothing for the moment of how that was accomplished. Tell him a sketch of how you drank. And we do that best. Sometimes I think when we start talking about our drinking, we brag, you know. If he is in a serious mood, dwell on the troubles liquor has caused you, being careful not to moralize or lecture. If his mood is light, tell him humorous stories of your escapades. Get him to tell some of his. Get him in a mood. When he sees you know all about the drinking game, commence to describe yourself as an alcoholic. Tell him how baffled you were, how you finally learned that you were sick. Give him an account of the struggles you made to stop. You know what they're telling you to describe? The powerlessness. How you tried to quit. Show him the mental twist which leads to the first drink of a spree. That peculiar mental twist that leads to the relapse. We suggest you do this as if we'd done it in the chapter on alcoholism. Go to the chapter on alcoholism and get a little more information. If he is alcoholic, he will understand you at once. He will match your mental inconsistencies with some of his own. Now it's getting back to you. If you are satisfied he is a real alcoholic, see, you're coming to the conclusion. You had him talking a little bit about his escapades. If you're satisfied he is a real alcoholic, that means that he needs this program. Begin to dwell on the hopeless feature of the melody. Show him from your own experience how the queer mental condition surrounding the first drink prevents normal functioning of the willpower. Don't, at this stage, refer to this book unless he has seen it and wishes to discuss it. The founders are saying this book is important. They're even suggesting before he comes to AA, you lay around there for him to read it. And be careful not to brand him as an alcoholic. One call in particular I can think of, it was a friend of my wife's asked me to go see her father. I went in and I talked to him. He was in a complete state of denial. But we had a friendly conversation. And I left that house following the directions in here. If you don't think you're alcoholic, continue drinking. If in the future you believe you have a problem, feel free to call me anytime. 3 years later, he did. He became a good member of AA until he passed away. If I would have forced him in here, he might have been another guy who came to the meeting to get the family off his back, as so many do, and then faded away. Let him draw his own conclusion. If he sticks to the idea he can still control his drinking, tell him that he possibly can if he is not too alcoholic. But insist that if he is severely afflicted, there may be little chance he can recover by himself. Continue to speak of alcoholism as an illness, a fatal malady. Talk about the conditions of body and mind which accompany it. There we go. Keep his attention focused mainly on your personal experience. Again, keep it on to you. Explain that many are doomed who never realize their predicament. Doctors are rightly loath to tell alcoholic patients the whole story unless it will serve some good purpose. But you may talk to him about the hopelessness of alcoholism because you offer a solution. You will soon have your friend admitting he has many, if not all, of the traits of the alcoholic. If his own doctor is willing to tell him he is alcoholic, so much the better. Even though your protege may not have entirely admitted his condition, he has become very curious to know how you got well. So this guy's sitting down there, and he's getting interested. Boy, you and I are communicating. I drank like that. Yeah, that's me. Let him ask you how you got well. And if he says, how did you get well? How do you answer him? I went to 90 meetings in 90 days. Tell him exactly what happened to you. Stress the spiritual feature freely. Direct contradiction to what's prevalent in AA today. If somebody would have talked to me about God and spirituality when they come to see me, I would have never been in AA. They're going to the extreme, away from the program proposed here. Maybe that's why our groups are turning over so quick. And maybe that's why Don was saying less than 10% recovery anymore. That's what's happening. because we were developing our own ideas. Remember what I read from the book? Bill Wilson says we want to get our program written down so that in the transmission, by human transmission from one person to another, the message does not get garbled. The message has gotten garbled. That's all that has happened. Stress the spiritual feature freely. If the man be agnostic or atheist, make it emphatic. He does not have to agree with your conception of God. He can choose any conception he likes, provided it makes sense to who? To him. The main thing is that he be willing to believe in a power greater than himself and that he live by spiritual principles. The main thing is that he be willing to believe in a power greater than himself and that he live by spiritual principles. Where are you with this man? You're on the first visit. Isn't this contradictory to what you have been told? I know it's from what I'm hearing people say. It's contradictory to what I hear speakers saying in the meetings, speaking to a group. I used to be a defender and stand up, but geez, you get worn down after a while. Now I talk to the individual while he's alone, because I got away from starting arguments at AA meetings. He used to call me, here comes the Messiah, the Crusader. When dealing with such a person, you had better use everyday language to describe spiritual principles. And that's all I have ever tried to use. I've never become a priest. I've never become a minister. I've never become a prophet. All I am is a recovered alcoholic. To describe spiritual principles. There is no use arousing any prejudice he may have against certain theological terms and conceptions about which he may already be confused. Don't raise such issues no matter what your own convictions are. Your prospect may belong to a religious denomination. His religious education and training may be far superior to yours, and I have. I've worked with several priests who've come into the program. I'm not going to talk to them about religion and spirituality. I'd be a fool to try to. In that case, he is going to wonder how you can add anything to what he already knows. But he will be curious to learn why his own convictions have not worked and why yours seem to work so well. He may be an example of the truth that faith alone is insufficient. To be vital, faith must be accompanied by self-sacrifice and unselfish constructive action. Let him see that you are not there to instruct him in religion. You know, before they titled the book Alcoholics Anonymous, who knows the title that was one of them that was presented as being the name of the big book? What? No, the James Group. Because most of what we got in our program came from the Bible and the New Testament, the letter of James. And he talks about faith without works is dead, gossip, criticism, and such. They used to read that chapter. It's only about 3 or 4 pages, and they used to meditate with it and have a lot of their discussions with it. Some people referred to early Alcoholics Anonymous as religious seances. You know? But that's where they were. They were right in there before they had their own program. Admit he probably knows more about it than you do, but call to his attention the fact that however deep his faith and knowledge, he could not have applied it or he would not drink. Perhaps your story will help him see where he has failed to practice the very precepts he knows so well. We represent no particular faith or denomination. We are dealing only with general principles common to most denominations. Outline the program of action explaining how you made a self-appraisal. What's that? Inventory. How you straightened out your past, restitution, and why you are now endeavoring to be helpful to him, 12-step. It is important for him to realize that your attempt to pass this on to him plays a vital part in your own recovery. Underline that. Actually, he may be helping you more than you are helping him. And I find that to be true today. Make it plain he is under no obligation to you, that you hope only that he will try to help other alcoholics when he escapes his own difficulties. Suggest how important it is that he place the welfare of other people ahead of his own. Make it clear that he is not under pressure, that he needn't see you again if he doesn't want to. You should not be offended if he wants to call it off, for he's helped you more than you have helped him. In other words, if he says, I don't want anything to do with it, don't become offended. And tell him when you're leaving, oh, geez, I still want to thank you for calling me because you've helped me. I can see more than I've helped you. Where was I? Oh, if your talk has been sane, quiet, and full of human understanding, you have perhaps made a friend. Maybe you have disturbed him about the question of alcoholism. That is all to the good. The more hopeless he feels, the better. He will be more likely to follow your suggestions. Now it says your candidate may give reasons why he need not follow all of the program. He may rebel at the thought of a drastic house cleaning which requires discussion with other people. Do not contradict such views. Don't get into contradictions. Don't start arguments. Tell him you once felt as he does, but you doubt whether you would have made much progress had you not taken action. On your first visit, tell him about the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. If he shows interest, lend him your copy of this book on your first visit. Unless your friend wants to talk further about himself, do not wear out your welcome. Give him a chance to think it over. If you do stay, let him steer the conversation in any direction he likes. Sometimes a new man is anxious to proceed at once, and you may be tempted to let him do so. What do they mean, tempted to do it at once? That means he wants to go through the steps right now on the same first night. This is sometimes a mistake. You let him do it the same night. If he has trouble later, he is likely to say you rushed him. You will be most successful with alcoholics if you do not exhibit any passion for crusade or reform. Never talk down to an alcoholic from any moral or spiritual hilltop. Simply lay out the kit of what kind of tools? Spiritual tools. There's no such thing as AA tools. They're always referred to as spiritual tools, again, for his inspection. Show him how they worked with you. Offer him friendship and fellowship. Tell him that if he wants to get well, you will do anything to help. If he is not interested in your solution, if he expects you to act only as a banker for his financial difficulties or a nurse for his sprees, you may have to drop him until he changes his mind. This he may do after he gets hurt some more. If he is sincerely interested and wants to see you again, ask him to read this book in the interval. Would you underline that? Ask him to read this book in the interval. After doing that, he must decide for himself whether he wants to go on. He should not be pushed or prodded by you, his wife, or his friends. If he is to find God, the desire must come from within. That's true of the people here in this room today. If you're going to find God, you're not going to ask questions and say, I got a blank check to do anything I want. This is an individual program. If you're going to find God and the process is sincere, your life and your ideas are going to start changing now. You're going to start different attitudes about life. If he thinks he can do the job in some other way or prefers some other spiritual approach, encourage him to follow his own conscience. I've met people who did. I'm going to go to church. Fine, go ahead and go. I don't consider that a slap in the face. I'm a firm believer that if churches all got together and found out how many of their membership came to the churches because of an alcohol or drug problem and recovered, we probably would have competition. But I don't make an issue out of it. I have a way that worked for me. I'll share it with you. And if other people have other ways, I don't get into arguments with them. Whatever works for them, fine. What did the founders say? We have a way out that worked for us. We have no monopoly on God. We merely have an approach that worked with us. There it was. I should have read another line. But point out that we alcoholics have much in common, and we would like in any case to be friendly. Let it go at that. Do not be discouraged if your prospect does not respond at once. Search out another alcoholic and try again. You are sure to find someone desperate enough to accept with eagerness what you offer. We find it a waste of time to keep chasing a man who cannot or will not work with you. If you leave such a person alone, he may soon become convinced he cannot recover by himself. To spend too much time on any one situation, to deny some other alcoholic an opportunity to live and be happy. One of our fellowship failed entirely with his first half-dozen prospects. He often says if he had continued to work on them, he might have deprived many others who have since recovered of their chance. Remember we was reading the story of Jim back here in the stories, more about alcoholism, and the AAs went to see him 6 times in a short period of time. And in the beginning it says you don't keep chasing the alcoholic. That's why I said he must have been a guy a lot like me. He was well liked. They kept coming after him. He had to be different. Underline this. Suppose now you are making your second visit to a man. Suppose now you are making your second visit to a man. You got that underlined? He has read this volume and says he is prepared to go through with the 12 steps of the program. When? Second visit after he read this book. You went there the first time, you got him interested, you lent him a copy of this book, and you said, in the interval, read this book, and now he calls you and he says, I read this book, how about coming down to see me? On the second visit. Now, are the founders of this program so off track that they didn't know what they were talking about? Are we sitting here because our ideas got us here? Whose ideas got us here? Right here. And take that black print and show it to any egomaniac in this program and tell them that. You did not get me here. The founders of AA laid out a program that worked. And it worked well until you guys came in here and started watering it down. He has read this volume and said he is prepared to go through with the 12 steps of the program of recovery. Having had the experience yourself, you can give him much practical advice. Let him know you are available if he wishes to make a decision and tell his story. But do not insist upon it if he prefers to consult with someone else. In other words, if he says, look, Ed, I'm going to come into this program and I'm probably going to be your friend and you and I are going to be close together. I got some things I want to discuss that I don't want you to know about me. I would like to discuss. Fine, don't get angry. I know there's some sponsors who feel that because they sponsor somebody, they should go through the steps with the individual. Maybe he doesn't want to go through them with you. Maybe he doesn't like you. You know, all sponsor pigeon relationships are not loving. And I'll tell you something else right now. The first man who becomes your sponsor doesn't have to be your sponsor the rest of his life or your life. If you feel you need another sponsor, it can help you more, that's your choice. You're not stuck with that guy for life like some people want to believe. I've met some individuals who come here, sponsors and the person they're helping, they clash. They're just different types of personalities. That's your option. I have a right to change, but don't offend them by it. Don't go and say you're rotten, I can't get along with you. Go out and get another sponsor. You don't have to come back and tell him. And if he says, did you get another sponsor? Well, I got a co-sponsor. That's all. Be nice. We're not here to wound anybody. He may be broke and homeless. That's where a lot of us are today. I have 3 units in Cleveland, in Lorraine, 3 rehab units. Very difficult to get support for alcohol and drug addiction programs. Money is tight. Biggest problem we got in our society today, and the one that most people spend the least money on. And if you say you're helping a drug addict or alcoholic, they say put them in prison. Major problem. I made a mistake. I found out I should have called my places centers for the homeless, because that's where all the alcoholics and drug addicts are anyway. They get all kind of support. But I put the word alcohol and drug rehab in there. And the centers for homeless are looking for counselors to counsel their people about alcohol and drug problems. It's a reality. Just think about this. We've come full circle. 60 years ago, if you were caught drinking, what happened to you, or using alcohol? You went to prison. Prohibition was on. If you were caught smoking a joint, what happened to you? Nothing. Misdemeanor. 60 years later, full circle on the other end of the spectrum, now what happens? You're caught smoking pot, what do? They won't throw you in prison. If you're caught drinking, it's all right, just don't drive. There's the difference. Social attitudes. If he is, you might try to help him about getting a job or give him a little financial assistance, but you should not deprive your family or creditors of money they should have. In other words, don't start taking care of alcoholics before you take care of your own family. First things first. Perhaps you will want to take the man into your home for a few days. Be sure you use discretion. Be certain he will be welcomed by your family and that he is not trying to impose upon you for money, connections, or shelter. Permit that and you only harm him. You will be making it possible for him to be insincere. You may be aiding in his destruction rather than his recovery. And about 99% of the population of AA got that paragraph down pat. It tells us not to give the guy money and bring him in our homes and everything else. But they only read one paragraph. They want to quote what's good for them. My wife and I have taken people into our homes forever. Until now, I moved back home in the family home with Uncle, and we don't want to infringe upon him. When I had my own home, I always had alcoholics there. But I didn't go around the streets looking for them. But if I found someone in a program that was having a rough time, and I knew they were trying to do a good job, and I knew where they were in the community, I brought them in and helped them. Nobody has ever attacked my wife or children or stolen from me or anything else. And I've heard people say, yeah, one day wait till he wakes up and his family's dead. Well, he's not going to do it even if he's safe. Let's look at the next paragraph. Never avoid these responsibilities. Sounds contradictory, doesn't it? It says use discretion. Never avoid these responsibilities, but sure you are doing the right thing if you assume them. Helping others is the foundation stone of your recovery. A kindly act once in a while isn't enough. You have to act a good Samaritan every day, if need be. It may mean the loss of many nights' sleep, great interference with your pleasures, interruptions to your business. It may mean sharing your money and your home, counseling frantic wives and relatives, innumerable trips to police courts, sanitariums, hospitals, jails, and asylums. Your telephone may jangle at any time of the day or night. Your wife may sometimes say she is neglected. A drunk may smash the furniture in your home or burn a mattress. You may have to fight with him if he is violent. Sometimes you'll have to call a doctor and administer sedatives under his direction. Another time you have to send for the police or an ambulance. Occasionally you will have to meet such conditions. Fortunately, today we don't have to, because we have enough places available now. Well, I shouldn't say enough, but some places available where when these conditions occur, we can place them there. Halfway houses, three-quarter houses. These things are available through the efforts of other members in this program. But you know, the people who complain about giving aid, they won't even support those institutions. You heard a man here the other night who says he'll never put a man in detox. Did you hear that? Get a Sekelki. and you have him in your home for a while, or see the poor guy shaking to death or going into convulsions, and by God, I'll put him in a detox. And I'll put him in immediately, just like I told you, the symptoms that you see. We have a fellow here that worked on that, right? Got him in a hospital, and exactly what I said was going to happen happened within 12 hours. This is reality. I'm not talking about the guy who bounces in, drinks 3 days, bounces out, drinks 3. I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about the alcoholic who's drinking daily, using it for medicine. You better have some medical attention ready for him, especially if he's in your home. We seldom allow an alcoholic to live in our homes for long at a time. It is not good for him, and it sometimes creates serious complications in a family. And I've seen some of that occur also. Sad, but it does. But usually when it occurs, the relationship was not stable in the first place. Though an alcoholic does not respond, there is no reason why you should neglect the family. You should continue to be friendly to them. The family should be offered your way of life. Should they accept and practice spiritual principles, there is a much better chance that the head of the family will recover. And even though he continues to drink, the family will find life more bearable. For the type of alcoholic who is able and willing to get well, little charity in the ordinary sense of the word is needed or wanted. The men who cry for money and shelter before conquering alcohol are on the wrong track. Yet we do go to great extremes to provide each other with these very things when such action is warranted. This may seem inconsistent, but we think it is not. It is not the matter of giving that is in question, but when and how to give. That often makes the difference between failure and success, and you learn that through practice. You're not a pro from the very beginning. The minute we put our work on a service plane, the alcoholic commences to rely upon our assistance rather than upon God. He clamors for this or that, claiming he cannot master alcohol until his material needs are cared for. Nonsense. Some of us have taken very hard knocks to learn this truth. Job or no job, wife or no wife, we simply do not stop drinking so long as we place dependence upon other people ahead of dependence upon God. Burn the idea into the consciousness of every man that he can get well regardless of anyone. The only condition is that he trusts in God and clean house. You ever hear that statement, trust God, clean house, and help others? That's a quote from the big book. But some people who don't know that go to AA meetings and say, I don't read the big book, I do what Dr. Bob suggested. I said, what did Dr. Bob suggested? Trust God, clean house, and help others. I said he was quoting the big book, dummy. What are we saying here? We got cons coming here. You'll soon pick them out. They'll come down, you give them something to eat, they'll ask you for a pack of cigarettes. You give them a pack of cigarettes, they'll ask you for $1. You know, what am I? You'll soon pick them out. They're not hard to discover. It tells you when a man comes in recovery, you'll be grateful. You give him a meal and say, can I do the dishes for you? That's the kind of guy I want. Not see how far he can go, see how much he can get. We get them in halfway houses. We got people that had no place to go, come there to live, and then start complaining about the food. I heard it here. I heard it here. Reality. There's no free lunches here. Those people who are looking for God are going to find Him, not without too much help from others. It'll come from within them, the need. What is 12-step work all about? I was sober a little over a year. I had a tremendous urge to drink. I mean, I had an urge like you wouldn't believe. I was going to get drunk. I put my clothes on to go to the bar. This is in my last 30-year stretch. And the bar that I usually drank at was closed. And I went to another bar. And just as I was going to enter the door of the bar room, a fella came out whose name was Russian Mike. He was a displaced person from the Second World War, and I did a lot of drinking with him. And he was coming out of the bar, and I mean, he was total wipeout. You know, the guy didn't even know where he was at. And he about fell into my arms, and I propped him up against the wall, and I started talking to Mike about the way I used to drink. And I said, Mike, you know how I used to drink? I used to get just like you. All the problems I had in my life, I don't know how long I talked to Mike, but he seemed to come to his senses a little bit, and in his broken English he said, what's the matter with you, Bill? Let me go home. Mike went this way, I went that way. I never went into the bar room. And about 3 or 4 years later, I was at a discussion meeting, and the topic of conversation at that meeting was 12-step work. And that experience came back to me, and it dawned on me 4 years later what 12-step work is all about. I stayed sober talking to another drunk. Just think of that. That's a spiritual experience for me as I look on it today. Not flashes of light. I was looking for that. You know, I told my sponsor after I went to the steps with him, I said, you know, I did the steps and nothing has happened. He said, what do you mean nothing's happened? I said, nothing's happened. He said, what'd you want? I said, I don't know. But I was ashamed to tell him. I wanted the room to vibrate, lightning and thunder to start, and the ceiling to open up and the old man come down in a cloud and say, thanks, Bill, I've been waiting for that. I was expecting that. See where my mind was? I couldn't just accept the fact that my program was getting better and I wasn't drinking. I wanted to have something to pinpoint it. And I find out today, you know, miracles are for non-believers. People who believe don't need miracles. Now the domestic problem. That means problems in the home. You're talking to this guy and there's problems in the home. There may be divorce, separation, or just strained relations. When your prospect has made such reparation as he can to his family and has thoroughly explained to them the new principles by which he is living, he should proceed to put those principles into action where? At home, not just at an AA meeting. That is, if he is lucky enough to have a home. That is, if he is, though his family be at fault in many respects, he should not be concerned about that. He should concentrate on his own spiritual demonstration. Argument and fault-finding are to be avoided like the plague. Argument and fault-finding are to be avoided like the plague. In many homes, this is a difficult thing to do, but it must be done if any results are to be expected. If persisted in for a few months, the effect on a man's family is sure to be great. The most incompatible people discover they have a basis upon which they can meet. Little by little, the family may see their own defects and admit them. These can then be discussed in an atmosphere of helpfulness and friendliness. After they have seen tangible results, the family will perhaps want to go along. These things will come to pass naturally in good time, provided, however, the alcoholic continues to demonstrate he can be sober, considerate, and helpful regardless of what anyone says or does. Of course, we all fall much below this standard many times, but we must try to repair the damage immediately lest we pay the penalty by a spree. Another warning. If you do any damage at home, repair the damage immediately lest we suffer from a spree. If there be divorce or separation, there should be no undue haste for the couple to get together. The man should be sure of his recovery. The wife should fully understand his new way of life. If their old relationship is to be resumed, it must be on a better basis since the former did not work. This means a new attitude and spirit all around. Sometimes it is to be the best interest of all concerned that a couple remain apart. Obviously, no rule can be laid down. It's not a black and white issue. Let the alcoholic continue his program day by day. When the time for living together has come, it will be apparent to both parties. Let no alcoholic say he cannot recover unless he has his family back. This just isn't so. In some cases, he will never come back for one reason or another. Remind the prospect that his recovery is not dependent upon people. It is dependent upon his relationship with who? God. We have seen men get well whose families have not returned at all. We have seen others slip when their family came back too soon. How come they say we have seen others slip when a family came back too soon? Why, I heard a guy in an AA meeting lead, and he said there's no such thing as a slip in AA. Founders spoke about it. You know what a slip is? We got about 29 of them in there. It's when you drink again. You want to get fancy, you call it relapse. You want to be with some other guy who goes around the country telling you this is common, you call it a symptom of alcoholism. Both you and the new man must walk day by day in a path of what? Spiritual progress. If we persist, remarkable things will happen. When we look back, we realize that things which came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were better than anything we could have planned. Follow the dictates of a higher power, and you will presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstances. When working with a man and his family, you should take care not to participate in their quarrels. You may spoil your chance of being helpful if you do, but urge upon a man's family that he's been a very sick person and should be treated accordingly. You should warn against arousing resentment or jealousy. You should point out that his defects of character are not going to disappear overnight. Show them he has entered upon a period of growth. Ask them to remember when they are impatient the blessed fact of his sobriety. If you have been successful in solving your own domestic problems, tell the newcomer's family how that was accomplished. And it doesn't say if you've never been successful in any domestic situation, tell some other guy who has a family how to do it. Doesn't say that. Always try to get your inspiration from a person who has been through the same thing as you. If people come up to me and they ask me a question, what should I do in this? I don't give them an idea that I have in my head. I'll tell them the truth. I've never experienced that, but I know somebody in AA who has, and I'm quite sure he wouldn't mind if you went and asked him. And I will send that individual directly to that individual who had the same experience. We share our strength, our hope, and our experience, not our theories. I think this is what I would do. Hell, I never did the right thing any time in my life. How do I know what I would do? I always wanted to be the knight in shining armor, and every time the opportunity arose, I failed miserably. I acted selfish and self-centered. Assuming we are spiritually fit, we can do all sorts of things alcoholics are not supposed to do. People have said we must not go where liquor is served. We must not have it in our homes. We must shun friends who drink. We must avoid moving pictures which show drinking scenes. We must not go into bars. Our friends must hide their bottles if we go to their houses. We mustn't think or be reminded about alcohol at all. Our experience, whose experience? The founders. Not this guy who's living in fear because he's never been through the program. Our experience shows that this is not necessarily so. We meet these conditions every day. An alcoholic who cannot meet them still has an alcoholic mind. There is something the matter with what? His spiritual status. His only chance for sobriety would be someplace like the Greenland ice cap, and even there an Eskimo would turn up with a bottle of scotch and ruin everything. Ask any woman who has sent her husband to distant places on the theory he would escape the alcohol problem. Underline this. In our belief, any scheme of combating alcoholism which proposes to shield the sick man from temptation is doomed to failure. The alcoholic tries to shield himself. He may succeed for a time, but he usually winds up with a bigger explosion than ever. We have tried these methods. These attempts to do the impossible has always failed. So our rule is not to avoid a place where there is drinking if we have a legitimate reason for being there. That includes bars, nightclubs, dances, receptions, weddings, even plain ordinary whoopee parties. To a person who has had experience with an alcoholic, this may seem like tempting providence, but it isn't. You will note, underline this, you will note that we made an important qualification. Therefore, ask yourself on each occasion, have I any good social, business, or personal reason for going to this place? Or am I expecting to steal a little vicarious pleasure from the atmosphere of such places? Vicarious means out of the ordinary. I looked it up. If you answer these questions satisfactorily, you need have no apprehension. Go or stay away, whichever seems best. But be sure you are on solid spiritual ground before you start, and that your motive in going is thoroughly good. And I'll tell you this much. If you're just going to AA meetings and you're not trying to be God into your life, you're not on sound spiritual ground, you can't do this. And if you're here 15 years and you've not gone through the steps to bring God into your life, you're still not going to be able to do it because you're not on sure spiritual ground. You're not on sure spiritual footing. And if you're here 30 years and you've never worked the steps and brought God into your life, you're still going to be telling people, you better watch out, you better not be there, you better not this, because you have not gone through what I told you was the recovered process. Remember, alcohol will be taken, the problem will be taken from your life, you'll still be fighting it. That's why I want the steps in my life. But be sure you are on solid spiritual ground before you start, and that your motive in going is thoroughly good. Do not think of what you will get out of the occasion, think of what you can bring to it. But if you are shaky, you had better work with another alcoholic instead. Again, the same thing you told us about the other issue. If you're shaky about it and you're not on sure spiritual ground, your work with an alcoholic is a better alternative. Now, what do you do with a friend of mine who just celebrated 20 years sobriety? He came into the program and he owns a bar. What do you tell that man? Sell your business. You can't be around booze. Do you tell him that? There were some guys would tell him that. You'd have to tell him, because you can't tell one alcoholic one thing and then another and have a contradiction. He's going to question you. I was coming home from a hospital. We had two people in the car. One was a doctor and the other was a laborer. And the man with me said to the other men in the car, now look at here, you guys make 90 meetings in 90 days. And the doctor said, well, I can't make 90 meetings in 90 days. I'll be on an emergency call and I'll be staying right in the hospital. He said, that's all right for you, you're a doctor. Now, what are you saying to him? A respecter of no race, nationality, creed, occupation, or anything? Now you've made an exception. Now I'm telling this man he can't be around booze, but it's all right for you because you own a bar. Another contradiction. What says covers all areas? Sound spiritual recovery. Then you're all right. That man developed a sound spiritual recovery because I helped sponsor him. And I took him through program and steps. Another man came in, was a bartender. He didn't quit his job. He stayed sober 27 years. But he was on sure spiritual ground. You see why you have to follow this? And you get these splinter groups. You got groups here telling you he'll get drunk. Then you have exceptions. Then you throw a whole shadow over the whole process now. Follow the dictates of a higher power, and your life is going to get better. Why sit with a long face in places where there is drinking, sighing about the good old days? If it is a happy occasion, try to increase the pleasure of those there. If a business occasion, go and attend to your business enthusiastically. If you are with a person who wants to eat in a bar, by all means go along. Let your friends know that they are not to change their habits on your account. At a proper time and place, explain to all your friends why alcohol disagrees with you. If you do this thoroughly, few people will ask you to drink. While you were drinking, you were withdrawing from life little by little. Now you are getting back into the social life of this world. Don't start to withdraw again just because your friends drink liquor. Your job now is to be at the place where you may be of maximum helpfulness to others. So never hesitate to go anywhere if you can be helpful. You should not hesitate to visit the most sordid spot on earth on such an errand. Keep on the firing line of life with these motives, and God will keep you unharmed. Many of us keep liquor in our homes. We often need it to carry green recruits through a severe hangover. Some of us still serve it to our friends, provided they are not alcoholic. But some of us think we should not serve liquor to anyone. We never argue this question. We feel that each family, in the light of their own circumstances, ought to decide for himself. I'm not afraid of alcohol. I was in a business. I used to provide it to people who contracted with me. I don't have alcohol in my home. There's no need for it. When I have a party, it doesn't even come to mind that I should have booze. But other members of my family do. And my brother's graduation for his son from college, he had booze over his house. He invited me to buy. What did he say? I can't go there because you serve liquor there? See, we have to get real. When I came into the program, I was not married. I lived with my mother and uncle. They had beer and they had some whiskey around. Do I tell them, I'm going to live with you, you got to throw your booze out? But if you can't stand being around it and you have an alcoholic mind, by God, wait till you get on sure spiritual footing, all right? We're careful never to show intolerance or hatred of drinking as an institution. Experience shows that such an attitude is not helpful to anyone. Every new alcoholic looks for this spirit among us and is immensely relieved when he finds we are not witch burners. A spirit of intolerance might repel alcoholics whose lives could have been saved had it not been for such stupidity. We would not even do the cause of temperate drinking any good, for not one drinker in 1,000 likes to be told anything about alcohol by one who hates it. Someday we hope Alcoholics Anonymous will help the public to a better realization of the gravity of the alcoholic problem. But we shall be of little use if our attitude is one of bitterness or hostility. Drinkers will not stand for it. After all, our problems were our own making. Bottles were only a symbol. Besides, we have stopped fighting anybody or anything we have to. Again, it does not say bottles are but a symbol of our disease. We make our own problems. We'll close for now with this session, and most of all, keep in mind that 12-step work is a key to sobriety. We're covering now is the Chapter 8 to Wives. Starts out with few exceptions. Our book thus far has spoken of men, but we have said applies quite as much to women. Our activities in behalf of women who drink are in the increase. There is every evidence that women regain their health as readily as men if they try our suggestions. That's for the program of rehabilitation for female alcoholics. But now it's going to go into the spouse part of the program. Those people who suffer, who don't use alcohol to sedate or tranquilize themselves. But for every man who drinks, others are involved. The wife who trembles in fear of the next debauch, the mother and father who see their son wasting away. Among us are wives, relatives, and friends whose problem has been solved, as well as some who have not yet found a happy solution. We want the wives, and today that should be, we want the spouse of Alcoholics Anonymous to address the spouse of men and women who drink too much. What they say will apply to nearly everyone bound by ties of blood or affection to an alcoholic. As wives of Alcoholics Anonymous, we'd like you to feel that we understand as perhaps few can. We want to analyze mistakes we have made. We want to leave you with the feeling that no situation is too difficult and no unhappiness too great to be overcome. We have traveled a rocky road. There is no mistake about that. We have had a long rendezvous with hurt pride, frustration, self-pity, misunderstanding, and fear. These are not pleasant companions. These are the defects of character that you're trying to deal with for the spouse who start suffering these conditions as a result of our alcoholism, male or female. We have been driven to maudlin sympathy. That means from tears, crying, maudlin, crying sympathy, to bitter resentment. In other words, they're describing the love-hate relationship that the spouse has with the alcoholic. One time they're crying for him, the next time they're laughing with him. Love-hate. Some of us veered from extreme to extreme, ever hoping that one day our loved ones would be themselves once more. Our loyalty and the desire that our husbands hold up their heads and be like other men have begotten all sorts of predicaments. We have been unselfish and self-sacrificing. We have told innumerable lies to protect our pride and our husbands' reputations. We have prayed, we have begged, we have been patient, we have struck out viciously, we have run away, we have been hysterical, we have been terror-stricken, we have sought sympathy, we have had retaliatory love affairs with other men. They're talking about the symptoms of the family disease right there in that paragraph. After that paragraph, put on the side, symptoms of the family disease. Our homes have been battlegrounds many an evening. In the morning we have kissed and made up. Our friends have consoled, chucking the men, and we have done so with finality, only to be back in a little while, hoping, always hoping. Our men have sworn great solemn oaths that they were through drinking forever. We have believed them when no one else could or would. Then in days, weeks, or months, a fresh outburst. You know, a lot of people are saying, how come people are coming in so much younger today? How come there's so much divorce today? At the time they was writing this book, it wasn't so mod to be divorced. If you were divorced and you went into the neighborhood, you were a scarlet woman, especially if you were a female. And at that time, it didn't take two people to raise a family. At the time they're writing this book, the male was usually the head of the household. He went to work and the woman stayed home. And she was dependent upon that male for her income. Today it's a little bit different. You know, you got two people working to raise a family now. I don't know if some of these old-timers could have survived the conditions that they have now, because they were head of the house, they were king of the castle. But you got two people working to raise a family now, and you got that guy out there drinking, he's not bringing any money. Oh, mama says immediately, I don't need you, out. See, that was never done previously. The woman was home with the children. The disease was confined to the home. We seldom had friends at our homes, never knowing how or when the men of the house would appear. We could make few social engagements. We came to live almost alone. When we were invited out, our husbands sneaked so many drinks that they had spoiled the occasion. If, on the other hand, they took nothing, their self-pity made them killjoys. Yeah, no time, no booze. I went through that. There was never financial security. Positions were always in jeopardy or gone. An armored car could not have brought the pay envelopes home. The checking account melted like snow in June. Sometimes there were other women. How heartbreaking was this discovery. How cruel to be told they understood our men as we did not. The bill collectors, the sheriffs, the angry taxi drivers, the policemen, the bums, the pals, and even the ladies they sometimes brought home. Our husbands thought we were so inhospitable. Joy killer, nag, wet blanket, that's what they said. Next day they would be themselves again and we would forgive and try to forget. See? There you go. If you don't have a person that's independent financially, these conditions are going to occur. A lot of abuse takes place. Wife abuse. For that simple reason, dependency. We have tried to hold the love of our children for their father. We have told the small tots that father was sick, which was much nearer the truth than we realized. They struck the children, kicked out door panels, smashed treasury crockery, and ripped the keys out of pianos. In the midst of such pandemonium, they have rushed out, threatening to live with the other woman forever. In desperation, we have even got tight ourselves, the drunk to end all drunks. The unexpected result was that our husbands seemed to like it. All right? Of course, I was a little different. I never went out to get drunk. I went out to get a fish fry. And let's go have a fish fry. I don't ever remember liking fish. My wife did, but it was a good excuse to get out. Perhaps at this point we got a divorce and took the children home to father and mother. Then we were severely criticized by our husband's parents for desertion. Usually we did not leave. We stayed on and on. We finally sought employment ourselves as destitution faced us in our families. And that's the quest for survival. And then a lot of people, I used to hear people say, well, when you take a job like that, you're enabling your husband to drink. So I don't know what they meant by that, but we began to ask medical advice as the sprees got closer together. The alarming physical and mental symptoms, the deepening pall of remorse, depression, and inferiority had settled down on our loved ones. These things terrified and distracted us. As animals on a treadmill, we have patiently and wearily climbed, falling back in exhaustion after each futile effort to reach solid ground. Most of us has entered the final stage with its commitment to health resorts, sanitariums, hospitals, and jails. Sometimes there was screaming delirium and insanity. Death was often near. Under these conditions, we naturally made mistakes. Some of them rose out of ignorance of alcoholism. Sometimes we sensed dimly we were dealing with sick men. Had we fully understood the nature of the alcoholic illness, we might have behaved differently. One of the only squabbles Bill and Lois ever mentioned having in regards to this program, besides his going to so many meetings, was Lois wanted to write this chapter. And Bill didn't allow her to write the chapter to wives. She wanted to give the wives' opinion and put it in the book. But he wanted to keep the same type of program, the flow and the wording. So he wrote it. And they had a little issue about that. How could men who loved their wives and children be so unthinking, so callous, so cruel? There could be no love in such persons, we thought. And just as we were being convinced of their heartlessness, they would surprise us with fresh resolves and new attentions. For a while they would be their old sweet selves, only to dash the new structure of affection to pieces once more. Asked why they commenced to drink again, they would reply with some silly excuse or none. It was so baffling, so heartbreaking. Could we have been so mistaken in the men we married? When drinking, they were strangers. Sometimes they were so inaccessible that it seemed as though a great wall had been built around them. And even if they did not love their families, how could they be so blind about themselves? What had become of their judgment, their common sense, their willpower? Questions. Why could they not see that drink meant ruin to them? Question. Why was it when these dangers were pointed out that they agreed and then they got drunk again immediately? These are some of the questions which race through the mind of every woman who has an alcoholic husband. We hope this book has answered some of them. Perhaps your husband has been living in that strange world of alcoholism where everything is distorted and exaggerated. You can see that he really does love you with his better self. Of course there is such a thing as incompatibility, but in nearly every instance the alcoholic only seems to be unloving and inconsiderate. It is usually because he is warped and sickened that he says and does those appalling things. Today, most of our men are better husbands and fathers than ever before, and I can attest to that. I have been a witness to situations where we went into homes where there was nothing in that family, nothing at all. Children didn't talk, wife didn't talk, husband didn't talk, all because of alcoholism or dual addiction. And after a period of time in AA, and these people become a part of this program, you come back there 6 months or a year later, and the family is smiling and they're happy again. And you know who I found to be the most grateful of these? All right? Those people who go out as a family and talk to other families. There's a program known as Families Anonymous also. They talk to the whole family. Great. I get an uplifting every time I see that. And children, You heard the one who got a card here the other night from his son. He said, "I admire you as a father." You know. Try not to condemn your alcoholic husband no matter what he says or does. Or if it's the other gender, try not to condemn the alcoholic wife. He is just another very sick, unreasonable person. Treat him when you can as though he had pneumonia. When he angers you, remember that he is very ill. And I put on the side of that, do not argue. There is an important exception to the foregoing. You're to practice patience and tolerance with that alcoholic, but now there's telling you also there's an important exception to the foregoing. We realize that some men are thoroughly bad-intentioned, that no amount of patience will make any difference. An alcoholic of this temperament may be quick to use this chapter as a club over your head. Don't let him get away with it. If you are positive he is one of this type, you may feel you had better leave. Is it right to let him ruin your life and the lives of your children, especially when he has before him a way to stop his drinking and abuse if he really wants to pay the price? What is the price he pays? Simple but not easy. A price must be paid. It means the destruction of self-centeredness. He wants to pay the price, he gets out of that self-centeredness. What they're speaking about in here is there's a big difference between a behavioral disorder and alcoholism. There's a big difference between that. Not only that, but we say this is a disease. And a lot of alcoholics will come in and say, I have a disease. But you also now have the solution. There's not an individual sitting in this room who does not know what the solution to his or her problem is. We cannot do it for you. It's up to you to follow the prescription for recovery. And if you relapse, it's not because it's a symptom of the disease, it's because you did not follow the treatment. It's your responsibility now to follow this treatment. And when you find yourself in wet places, doing things you're not supposed to do that God wouldn't want you to do, when you find yourself hanging around with people who use, you're not following the prescription. You can do the simple things. God will do the difficult. The problem with which you struggle usually follows within one of four categories. Now they're going to break down the type of drinking that occurs in the families. Here's the one. Your husband may be only a heavy drinker. His drinking may be constant, or it may be heavy only on certain occasions. Perhaps he spends too much money for liquor. It may be slowing him up mentally and physically, but he does not see it. Sometimes it's a source of embarrassment to you and his friends. He is positive he can handle his liquor, that it does him no harm, that drinking is necessary in his business. He would probably be insulted if were called an alcoholic. This world is full of people like him. Some will moderate or stop altogether, and some will not. Of those who keep on, a good number will become true alcoholics after a while. Now, number two, your husband is showing lack of control, for he is unable to stay on a water wagon even when he wants to. He often gets entirely out of hand when he's drinking. He admits this is true, but is positive he will do better. He is beginning to try, with or without your cooperation, various means of moderating or staying dry. Maybe he is beginning to lose his friends. His business may suffer somewhat. He's worried at times. He's becoming aware he cannot drink like other people. He sometimes drinks in the morning and through the day also to hold his nervousness in check. He is remorseful after serious drinking bouts and tells you he wants to stop. But when he gets over the spree, he begins to think once more how he can drink moderately next time. We think this person is in danger. These are the earmarks of a real alcoholic. Perhaps he can still tend to business fairly well. He has by no means ruined everything. As we say among ourselves, he wants to stop. 3, here comes the progression. This husband has gone much further than husband number 2. The once like number 2, he became worse. His friends have slipped away. His home is near wreck and he cannot hold a position. Maybe the doctor has been called in and a weary round of sanitariums and hospitals has begun. He admits he cannot drink like other people, but does not see why. He clings to the notion he will yet find a way to do so. He may have come to the point where he desperately wants to stop but cannot. His case presents additional questions which we shall try to answer for you. You can be quite hopeful of a situation like this. The guy's getting worse and they're telling you to become hopeful. You want to know why the old-timer said you haven't drank enough? Who's the best sponsor into this program we have? Booze. Booze will get you here sooner than any education. 4. Here comes the final guy. You may have a husband or wife of whom you completely despair. He has been placed in one institution after another. He is violent or appears definitely insane when drunk. Sometimes he drinks on the way home from the hospital. Perhaps he's had delirium tremens. Doctors may shake their heads and advise you to have him committed. Maybe you have already been obliged to put him away. This picture may not be as dark as it looks. Many of our husbands were just as far gone, yet they got well. Let's now go back to husband number 1. Oddly enough, he is often difficult to deal with. He enjoys drinking. It stirs his imagination. His friends feel closer over a highball. Perhaps you enjoy drinking with him yourself when he doesn't go too far. You have passed happy evenings together, chatting and drinking before your fire. Perhaps you both like parties which would be dull without liquor. We have enjoyed such evenings ourselves. We had a good time. We know all about liquor as a social lubricant. Some, but not all of us, think it has advantages when reasonably used. The first principle of success is that you should never be angry. The first principle of success is that you should never be angry. Even though your husband becomes unbearable and you have to leave him temporarily, you should, if you can, go without rancor. Patience and good temper are most necessary. In other words, detach. Our next thought is that you should never tell him what he must do about his drinking. If he gets the idea you are a nag or a killjoy, your chance of accomplishing anything useful may be 0. He will use that as an excuse to drink more. He will tell you he's misunderstood. This may lead to lonely evenings for you. He may seek someone else to console him, not always another man. And don't misinterpret that. Be determined that your husband's drinking is not going to spoil your relations with your children or your friends. They need your companionship and your help. It is possible to have a full and useful life, though your husband continues to drink. We know women who are unafraid, even happy under these conditions. Do not set your heart on reforming your husband. You may be unable to do so no matter how hard you try. You know what has been strange to me over the years? And I've been involved in rehab for about 25 years. I've gone to organizations that deal with the spouse of an alcoholic. Strange as it may seem, when a separation occurs and they leave an alcoholic, especially the female, who do you think they marry again? Another alcoholic. I don't know why that is or how that is, but it's true. And some of them will latch on to somebody just because he don't drink and find out that he has other issues that are not dealt with. You know? So it is often, and I went to Al-Anon meetings when I first started my first rehab unit. It was part of our program. And I would go down there and I would listen to some of the horror stories, and I could not understand why those people would live with that alcoholic. But do you know, as a result of the person's alcoholism, they developed an inner structure. And it was that testing in that daily life with the alcoholic that made them grow strong inwardly. We're going to cover a lot of these issues in the chapter, The Family Afterward. You're going to enjoy that. We know these suggestions are sometimes difficult to follow, but you will save many a heartbreak if you can succeed in observing them. Your husband may come to appreciate your reasonableness and patience. This may lay the groundwork for a friendly talk about his alcoholic problem. Try to have him bring up the subject himself. Be sure you are not critical during such a discussion. Attempt instead to put yourself in his place. Let him see that you want to be helpful rather than critical. When a discussion does arise, you might suggest he read this book, or at least a chapter on alcoholism. Tell him you have been worried, though perhaps needlessly. You think he ought to know the subject better, as everyone should have a clear understanding of the risk he takes if he drinks too much. Show him you have confidence in his power to stop or moderate. Say you do not want to be a wet blanket, that you only want him to take care of his health. Thus you may succeed in interesting him in alcoholism. In other words, don't say you're a drunk quit. They're telling him approach it tactfully. This information that you have, you may be able to help. Because if you sober up in this program, and you have a family, there's going to be other families that are going to come over and ask you what they can do for your husband. And you can't just tell the person, well, get him into AA if the guy's not going to AA. You're going to be able to share some of this information with the spouse. So some of this information you can relate to that spouse when they come over. Gee, how did you quit drinking, Bruce? What can I do about it? Then Bruce can share this information. He probably has several alcoholics among his own acquaintances. You might suggest that you both take an interest in them. Drinkers like to help other drinkers. Your husband may be willing to talk one of them. Even before he comes to AA, they say as a remedy for alcoholism, start talking about another person's drinking. If this kind of approach does not catch your husband's interest, it may be best to drop the subject, but after a friendly talk, your husband will usually revive the topic himself. This may take patient waiting, but it'll be worth it. Meanwhile, you might try to help the wife of another serious drinker. Al-Anon, help other Al-Anons. If you act upon these principles, your husband may stop or moderate. Suppose, however, that your husband fits the description in number 2. The same problems which apply to husband number 1 should be practiced, but after his next binge, ask him if he would really like to get over drinking for good. Do not ask that he do it for you or anyone else, just would he like to. The questions are he would. Show him your copy of this book and tell him what you have found out about alcoholism. In other words, get some information and education yourself about the problem. Show him that as an alcoholic, the writers of the book understand. Tell him some of the interesting stories you have read. If you think he'll be shy of a spiritual remedy, ask him to look at the chapter on alcoholism. Then perhaps he will be interested enough to continue. If he is enthusiastic, your cooperation will mean a great deal. If he is lukewarm or thinks he's not an alcoholic, we suggest you leave him alone. Avoid urging him to follow our program. The seed has been planted in his mind. He knows that thousands of men, much like himself, have recovered, but don't remind him of this after he has been drinking, for he may be angry. Sooner or later, you're likely to find him reading the book once more. Wait until repeated stumbling convinces him he must act, for the more you hurry him, the longer his recovery may be delayed. Now you're going to husband number 3 and the drinking is increasing. If you have a number 3 husband, you may be in luck. He's getting worse. They're telling you it's better.